Hello ladies and gentlemen, Spirit of the Law here. Today's Civ overview is all about the Celts, or if you're from Boston or Glasgow, the Celts. That means for the sake of this video guys, we're gonna have to pretend that we hate these teams. That's the rules. It seems fitting to put this overview out on St. Patrick's Day. That is, if we ignore the fact that St. Patrick basically tried to, quote, convert, subjugate, and drive off the pagans, specifically the Celts. They're the second most popular civilization to play online, and I know lots of people have been requesting them, so let's jump into it. The Celts are an infantry civilization. As always, we'll start by looking at their bonuses. Their team bonus is that their siege workshops work 20% faster. Wait, infantry civilization? Okay. So that means the siege workshops make 6 units in the time that other ones make 5. Of course, that'll mean everyone on your team is just a bit better in the siege department, so whether it's getting out those first couple of mangonels, or if you're doing the full mass scorpion thing, it's just going to make everything run a bit smoother. Keep in mind this doesn't affect how quickly castles make trebuchets, it only helps siege workshop units. Now their first non-team bonus is their infantry move 15% faster. This makes a lot of historical sense since Dublin does have the 5th fastest walkers in the world according to science. This upgrade has particular significance in the early game. Militia, for example, become as fast as Berserks and Huscarls before Squires, and Celt Spearmen are faster than Eagle Scouts in Feudal Age and early Castle. To balance this out, Celts don't get Squires, which of course raises infantry speed by 10%, so it's not as huge as it might initially sound, and they only end up 5% faster than infantry units from most civilizations. The second bonus is arguably one of the most significant economy bonuses in the early to mid game, and it's that their Lumberjacks work 15% faster. Now this makes sense since Plaid does come from Scotland. Basically 7 Celt villagers is roughly the same as 8 of anyone else's, maybe even a little bit better because less crowding increases collection rate a tiny bit. In a very streamlined Dark Age, going up on 22 population at the soonest possible time of 7 minutes and 55 seconds, you collect in the ballpark of 470 wood as Celts, meaning you have about 60 more wood to work with already thanks to the bonus. Or if we're heading into a fast castle and going up on 26 villagers, 11 on wood while you're advancing, you can expect to have collected around 1400 wood when you reach Feudal Age as Celts. Compared to other civilizations under that same sort of build, you're getting in the ballpark of an extra 180 wood. That's enough to comfortably cover a military building or a few extra farms. Obviously, the exact amount you're getting depends on how you go about things, but it's nice that it gives you some options with a resource that's usually at a premium in both Feudal and Castle Age, and that's when you're going to be getting a lot of farms, military buildings, and town centers out. So that's your first option. You can leave a normal amount of villagers on wood and just take the extra income. Or, if you prefer, you can transfer a couple of villagers off of wood and onto other areas of economy to make whatever other strategy you're going for a bit stronger. An extra villager on both food and gold, for example, is going to help with researching and advancing, or maybe you send them to stone a bit earlier to save up for a castle. It's a really flexible bonus regardless of your skill level and strategy, which is what makes it so strong in my opinion. One thing I would mention though is that you don't want to neglect your lumber camp and mill upgrades, since if your opponents get them and you don't, you're basically giving up your advantage. Their third bonus is that siege workshops fire 25% faster, or more technically, they reload 25% faster. This time, siege weapons does include the trebuchets. We can see it does affect both the onager and scorpion line as we would expect. Keep in mind as well that Celts don't get the bombard cannon, and even if you convert an enemy bombard cannon, it won't be affected by your upgrades and your bonuses. Now this all means 2 things. First of all, more theoretical damage output over time, maybe against buildings for example, but in a more practical sense it'll often mean that they're harder for units to dodge, and considering mangonels are a go-to counter for ranged units in Castle Age, that's a pretty big deal. The fourth bonus is that sheep can't be converted if they're within 1 Celt unit's line of sight. Before I tell you about this bonus, I'm going to have to ask that you read over and accept the terms of this contract. Don't worry about the details, but it basically says you can't use any of the information you learn about this bonus against me online. And there's implied acceptance of this contract if you continue watching the video. Okay, now that we have the legal stuff out of the way, before testing this out, I had no idea what this bonus meant, and I would wager a guess that this is the most misunderstood bonus in the game. After all, isn't it true that sheep don't get converted if they're within 1 unit's line of sight for any civilization? Whether you're the Celts or Japanese or whomever, sheep in one of your unit's line of sight can't be converted, even if your opponent has more units in the area. If that sheep was yours first and is still being watched, it can't be converted. So then what does the bonus do? This one's kind of slipped under the radar, and we've all been thinking it's a defensive bonus to protect your own sheep. In actual fact, it's not that your own sheep can't be converted if they're within your line of sight. That's always true by default. It means you convert enemy sheep within your line of sight, even if they have a unit nearby. It should say all sheep are converted within your line of sight, since that's what it does in practice. That's completely different and makes them a top-tier sheep-stealing civilization. You can use that bonus to steal a sheep from right under an opponent or ally's town center, unless they also happen to be Celts, in which case everything behaves like normal. Personally, it's not really my style to lame opponents or the computer, but unless your opponent happens to have seen this video or plays as the Celts all the time, I imagine they're going to be pretty surprised when it happens, and the computer is hopeless at preventing this. Just don't forget that contract you implicitly accepted. So that's all of their bonuses. It's a bit of siege stuff, a little infantry speed boost, and a couple of economy bonuses. It's a nice range from a timing perspective, with the Lumberjack and infantry bonuses helping predominantly in the early game, and as those start to be less valuable to you later in the game, that's when the siege bonuses start to kick in. Now let's take a look at their unique unit, the Woad Raider. First of all, their best known quality is they're really fast. Almost as fast as an elite Eagle Warrior with squires, and faster than one without. Now speed aside, they make for a pretty straightforward comparison with the swordsman line. It's not quite a perfect match, and they consistently have 10 more HP, but it's with similar attack, very similar armor, with the champion having 1 more melee armor than the elite Woad Raider. Notice the very large spike in attack when you get the elite upgrade, which costs 1,000 food and 800 gold. It's a bit more than the 1,050 food and only 450 gold to upgrade the longswordsman to champion. Of course, the most important difference is the speed, and the Woad Raider is much faster than the champion, which is already the fastest champion in the game if you're playing as the Celts. Now for that speed and higher HP, we have to pay a slightly higher cost. And you do need to make them from a castle, which is typically a strike against a unit on account of how much easier it is to lay down 4 barracks and pump out units rather than trying to lay down 4 castles. But that's offset by the fact that the Woad Raider is created in about half the time as a champion. So massing them up isn't as big of a concern, and 1 castle can create 40 Woad Raiders in 5 minutes. What about some of those hidden bonuses though? It turns out against Eagle Warriors, Woad Raiders get half the damage bonus of the regular champion, and identical bonus damage against buildings, which I'm surprised isn't higher considering they're called Raiders. Even without a strong bonus against buildings, they're still a good raiding unit though because of their speed, and they can hunt down villagers and archers pretty easily. Like the champion, they're a solid counter to halberdiers and skirmishers, and have a similar weakness to hand cannoneers and slingers. We could make an argument that they're weakly countered by the champion line itself because of their slightly cheaper cost and comparable stats, and with similar army sizes, the Woad Raider comes out on top, but having lost slightly more gold worth of units. Overall, they're a cheap maneuverable infantry that's hard to counter and isn't difficult to mass, and it can be comfortably used in the role of defending siege units, but it's probably more in its element hitting the opponent's economy and taking out military buildings and that sort of thing. I'd say it's pretty reasonable to think of them as a faster version of the champion, with less of a weakness to archers and siege. Now let's take a look at their unique tech, which is that their Siege Workshop units have 50% more HP. It costs 750 food and 450 gold, which is quite a bit, but so is 50% more health. And it's cheaper than the Siege Onager and Heavy Scorpion upgrades, so it's a pretty good deal considering how much it improves both of those units. In some circumstances, 50% more health can mean a disproportionately greater performance in a fight, like how a Celt Siege Onager can comfortably survive a direct Onager shot, and just barely survive a Siege Onager shot. The Siege Rams as well have 405 HP, which makes them crazy when they're soaking up arrow fire. The heavy scorpions with 75 HP are also going to be tanky, and they can take a direct onager shot, which for other civilizations would have been devastating. The only concern for me is trying to afford the upgrade, since it's not the only Imperial Age upgrade for your siege that you'll be trying to get as soon as possible. And it's already more than 2200 food and 1500 gold to get from the mangonel to the siege onager, for example, and 1000 food and 1100 wood for the heavy scorpion, and 1300 food to get from the battering ram to the siege ram. Now let's take a look at the expansion changes. The new expansion tech is strongholds, which makes castles and towers fire 25% faster. For towers, this synergizes well with the addition of arrow slits, making their keeps do about double the damage that they did in the base game. A couple of things to note though is first, we don't have bracer, so the castles and towers are limited for range, and also that this tech comes a bit late for a tower rush. It's much weaker than the Japanese Yasuma tech, so for the slightly lower cost, you're really getting quite a bit less. Personally, I wouldn't say this makes Celt towers particularly appealing. As for the castles, you're still missing bracer and architecture, so they lose badly against a castle with both of those techs. I also don't feel it makes the castles better at holding a location than any other, and a lot of the units that are going to be fighting around your castle or attacking it will either outrange it or have such high pierce armor that a few extra castle shots don't really change the outcome. For a castle job, it's nice to have the extra attack rate, and you can make an argument that it's cheap enough that you might as well get it. Another small change is that the unique tech that gave you plus 50% HP now only gives plus 40%. It ends up costing the same amount of resources, and it just looks like a small rebalance. And I could certainly see the argument that Celt Siege in the base game was a little unbalanced and overpowered. So that's all the units and bonuses and the changes in the expansion. Now let's take a look at the tech tree, starting with the archers. The first thing I notice is they're missing a lot of really key stuff, starting with thumb ring. I'm gonna have to give them a C, though it's tough to capture in a single grade. They're pretty strong early, but they have such a sharp drop off after that I find it's hard to even say they're average. I guess if you only look at it from the perspective of an archer rush into crossbows, then they're above average until maybe mid castle age. Next up is the infantry. They have fully upgraded halberdiers and champions, and that's usually worth at least a B. And considering their fast Woad Raiders and infantry speed bonus, it's definitely a bit higher than that. You can't really overpower Japanese, Goths, or Aztecs with Celt infantry, but the extra maneuverability is going to separate them from the Spanish, for example, who I think got a B+. Considering that, I'd say Celt slot in with an A-. Looking now at the cavalry, no bloodlines means the knights are going to be a bit behind a lot of other civilizations. They're also missing the last defense upgrade in Imperial Age. Paladins and Hussars are there, but significantly weaker than other civilizations like the Huns. This one's a tough call, but I feel like it's a B. It's hard to justify a B- or lower in cavalry for a civilization with Paladin and Hussar, and hard to justify a B+ or higher for a civilization without bloodlines. Next up is Siege, and this is where things start to get good. They're hands down a top 4 siege civilization, and there's certainly an argument they have a definitive edge over the Mongol and Slavic siege workshops. Koreans are a tough one to compare because their extra siege onager range is pretty powerful, and they also have bombard cannons. So Celts may not be hands down the best in siege, but they're certainly an A+, and arguably the top of the siege world. Considering their faster fire rate, faster workshops, extra HP, and nearly full tech tree, I can't possibly justify anything lower. Let's take a look now at the Navy. The Lumberjack bonus does help here a lot, and I'd say it's an A- in the early game. It's more of a B in the late game though, since they don't have bracer and they're missing a couple of ship upgrades. But there is shipwright, and their Lumberjack bonus does put them ahead of a lot of other civilizations without the final wood and farm upgrades. Overall, I'd say it's a B+, and I think anyone would be pretty happy about landing Celts by random on a water map. Taking a quick look at the monks, it's pretty terrible. I'd give it a C-. There's no gold boost or redemption, and that automatically puts them fairly low. It's probably just as well though, since monks don't heal siege, and infantry is cheap enough that you generally don't see people making an effort to heal them. Looking at defenses now, as I've pointed out, there is no bracer, and nothing really makes them excel at defenses. They're also missing some of the special counter units like hand cannoneer and camels, but they're also not terrible, having heated shot, keep, and fortified walls. For the base game, I'd say it's a C+. Strongholds helps a bit in the expansions, but it's still probably B-ish. Taking a look now at the economy, there's a lot of things to like about it, especially the Lumberjack bonus for the early game, which as we saw at the start of the video tends to add up pretty quickly. In the late game, they'll be missing out on crop rotation and two-man saw, and that's worth pointing out, because missing crop rotation means their farms only have about 2/3 of the food that some other civilizations are getting, meaning they spend 47% more wood upkeeping their farms by not having that tech. And their 15% Lumberjack bonus is reduced to only 5% more than other civilizations with two-man saw. So Celts will stay significantly ahead of a civilization like the Mongols in terms of wood collection, but for the 10 civilizations that get both of those upgrades, they'll all have an edge on the Celts for wood in the Imperial Age, especially the Teutons. Personally, I would take the Celts bonus over both of those technologies myself, since wood usually isn't too big of an issue in the late game. Other than that, the economy tree is complete, and I'd say it's an A. When thinking about some good maps for the Celts, they're probably best known as a top-tier Black Forest civilization, and to a lesser extent maybe Arena, on account of their siege, which tends to do well in choke point situations and when you have a chance to boom. They also hold their own on water, and their early game bonuses make them capable on maps like Arabia to pull off competitive strategies at an above average level. I think one reason they're so popular is that they're effective on a lot of different map types, so they work well for people who just want to pick one civilization they use every time and get to know that one civilization really well. If you find you favor an aggressive playstyle, they're certainly able to go for rushing with infantry, archers, though they'll be missing thumb ring, knights, though they'll be missing bloodlines of course, and they're really the #1 civilization for trying any kind of siege rush. So there's a lot of variety in those fast-paced open maps, which is always fun and makes you hard to predict. The real strength though is for people who like to boom and mass up their army and then unleash everything at 45 or 50 minutes into the game. Siege onagers or scorpions protected by halberdiers is a particularly effective combination, especially with some Woad Raiders to chase down enemy siege. They'll do a lot better in team games with safe trades on account of how gold intensive all that siege is, and the fact that their elite skirmishers barely improve between Castle Age and Imperial, so they're only worth using as a last resort. That's all for this one though. In the words of St. Patrick himself, Fiodiage Trebach Kiart. In modern English that translates to, may the Irish hills caress you, may her lakes and rivers bless you, may the luck of the Irish enfold you, may the siege onagers of St. Patrick pwn you. Thanks for watching guys, I'll see you next time.